Call meeting to order for the Electoral Area Directors Meeting. First on the agenda is First Nations and Land Acknowledgement. The TNRD acknowledge that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district, and today we're located in the Thompson-Nicola territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Shrupnik Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with the Thompson-Nicola Shrupnik and respect territory and land with which we gather today. Okay, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? I'm just going to add one in here. I have asked area directors to bring 2 items that they would like to have addressed here at our Electoral Area Directors Meeting, and that will be added on at the end of the meeting. Okay, next on the agenda, do I need a motion for that to add to the agenda, or does that just happen?
Will you be discussing it through the round table?
Yeah, it's a round table discussion.
Then we don't need to enter it. We can
good.
Do it then. Thank you.
So the next on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes from the May 18th. Okay, all in favor? Did we get a seconder? Okay. The next is reports. TNRD Fire Smart update. And is that Jamie that's doing that?
Yeah.
Oh, it does say 2 in there. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to turn it over to Jason for the majority of the presentation. And this is just an update on the Fire Smart program. We're in the first year of this new program that we implemented and got funding for this year. So I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right. Good afternoon. Make sure I know how to use this remote. So just a quick review on how we got started here with our Fire Smart program and funding. And even though we're in our first year of operations, we're actually only 5 months into it, as the funding, we were approved kind of in that first quarter, and then we had to hire staff and get going. So by the time we really got boots on the ground, we were damn near the end of May, early June. But as noted, this program is 100% grant funded. Daniel Funk is our Fire Smart coordinator. He was a recent retired Kamloops city firefighter and has fit the program really well. And Jeremy Denny, as you probably all know, is our regional training officer. And so that funding actually covers 1.5 FTEs. So half of Jeremy's funding comes out of Fire Smart as well. The 2 action items for this year out of this ultimately are the community wildfire resiliency plans and Fire Smart activities. On the Fire Smart front, this is kind of the checklist of what we have to date. And you can, I won't read those verbatim line by line, but as you can see, there's been a number of community events. We've engaged in our library systems as another means of getting out into the public. Recently, there was a work bee. We'll see probably more of this next year, but this is where the Fire Smart coordinator gets involved hands-on with the community to actually identify and help them work on their private properties to remove those fuels. The bottom end there is really just all the swag that comes along with the program. So there's a lot of manuals, handouts, landscape guides, these fancy red coffee cups that have Fire Smart on them. So that's kind of the unit items that have been handed out so far to help promote the program and remind people that Fire Smart's here. And I think after this year, it's going to be here for a while and continue to evolve. With the public engagements on that previous slide, I noted there was 20, and this is just a snapshot so you guys can see kind of the saturation within the regional district of where our Fire Smart coordinators are getting out to. You'll also notice that they are in some of the member municipalities, as those are catchment areas for the regional district, as well as some other areas like Lac Lejeune and Roche Lake that are communities that have shown interest and wanted that education. So they've reached out and got those programs set up. Just a couple pictures here of Daniel Funk there with the Fire Smart and the TNID Fire Protection Service shirt on. And that was, I believe, taken at the grand opening of Little Fort Park. And then on the right-hand side, I believe, is at the Ashcroft Library. And that's just kind of a general setup of what you see on the table with the pamphlets and the bags and assorted materials that come from the Fire Smart program. And I'll add, all the Fire Smart materials come from the province. So that's part of the funding. They give us the funding and we end up buying all these products back from the province. So it's kind of an interesting relationship there. On the CW resiliency plan side, as we refer to it as CWRP, just kind of a quick snapshot of what that background looks like. These originated out of the Philman report from 2003 wildfires, and they started with CWPPs, which are kind of the community wildfire protection plans, and then they've evolved as the province. I got to get closer to this thing or further away. I don't know. Further away, swallowing the mic. And so as Fire Smart education has evolved, the province realized they had to change a bit. So they partnered with BC Fire Smart, and CWPPs now become CWRPs. And so it's a bit of an evolution on how they collect information and how they execute fire mitigation. And in the CWPP days, it was where local governments engaged with funding to do fire mitigation work from private property boundaries into the Crown interface areas. Now the CWRP focuses within the private property areas and not onto the Crown land side. And in that small print there, that's hard for me to read, are really identifying the goals of what the CWRP program is all about.
Sorry, the CWRP is on private, not Crown.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, the CWPP, the initial piece with that Crown land interface area is still managed, but it's under the Ministry of Forest now. So it's managed at a provincial level, not at a local government level. So also, as part of the Fire Smart funding, as we move forward into 2024, part of the mandate is to complete 10 CWRPs, and really that represents one for each electoral area. For that process, we hired Foresight consultants to go out, and they've been working hard at meeting kind of the fourth quarter goal of having those 10 CWRPs completed, which then we submit obviously back to the province to get funding for next year. So with that, they've completed a 250 threat assessment plots throughout the entire regional district. And in October, we're moving forward with the public engagement component. And I believe hopefully all directors here have been contacted through Mike Simpson as he's coordinating that on our behalf. Excuse me. So essentially, this is what the schedule looks like for those public engagement meetings throughout the month of October. Fire Smart Committee, is this where you want to take it on, Jamie, or you want me to go over it?
And then you can fill in any blanks if I miss anything. Sure. Yeah, so as part of the Fire Smart funding and as part of the CWRP process, then the next phase would be to create Fire Smart Committee, a regional district Fire Smart Committee. So it's comprised of both community members and technical experts. So I mentioned it's part of the CWRP process and a condition of the funding. Now, the role of this committee is to provide input and guidance regarding the development and the implementation of the Fire Smart programs and implementation of the CWRPs. just a point of clarity in terms of how it's functioning. We're not creating a new committee of the board. It's not going to have any delegated authority to the board. It's a public advisory committee. But even though saying that, it still is a very important role that we want to get broad representation across the region to have input on these programs, especially at a regional district level. You know, we're 45,000 square kilometers and we got all different communities, different forest types throughout the regional district. But we are operating one program, even though we're having CWRPs for each electoral area. We're going to operate under one Fire Smart committee to provide guidance and direction to how the program works. So that gets me to your homework as EA directors. So one Fire Smart representative is what we want from each electoral area to sit on that committee. Now it is a pretty significant commitment. We're looking for a commitment to someone to regularly attend those meetings. At least in the startup of the committee, they're going to be monthly committees or monthly meetings, because there'll be kind of a lot of work and education to get them up to speed. It may decrease in future years. We haven't determined yet exactly the format. Likely it'll be both a mix of online or in-person meetings, and beginning at the end of this year or early 2024. So yeah, your homework is to go back, think of a community member that you would like to appoint as a representative from your electoral area.
Excuse me, Jamie, I have a question.
Yeah.
Where will this committee be meeting?
So it's going to be, we haven't determined how many meetings are going to be in person versus on Zoom. But if it's in person, it'll probably be in this room here in Kamloops. Yeah.
Just another question. Is there any remuneration for expenses or travel, or is that involved, or is it strictly totally I guess you'd call a dedicated individual that would come and support our communities?
Yeah. Yeah, our public committees, there's no payment for attending, but expenses are covered. So travel expenses and applicable meal expenses would be covered. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question on this. Will you be emailing this out to us? Or do
Yes.
we need to take notes?
Yeah, I'll be following up this with an email. I'll actually probably just put the slide directly into an email and send it to all you. But yeah, looking for the end of this month, if you can contact someone and decide someone who's willing to do this. And in addition to the representatives from each electoral area, we will have some technical expertise and other people on that committee. So it'll be a fairly large group, probably 15 or 20, up to that many people on that committee. Anything to add to that, Jason?
And just Director Tasso.
Thank you, Chair. Is there any limitations on eligibility? Because there has been a few very enthusiastic members of my community, but I noticed getting involved in Fire Smart, but I noticed some of them are contractors, local businesses. Would there be any conflicts of interest for them, for a business owner to sit on these Fire Smart, on this committee? Thank you.
The short answer is no. I mean, you can appoint anyone you wish, but if there's, specific things that come up that they might have a conflict in, then they would, have to declare that if that became up an issue. But generally speaking, I would say no.
Director Hooton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On EAs that have different communities within them, like mine, we have two distinct major communities in the Knutsford area, where we've been in this fire thing all year, all summer, and also like the town of Pritchard. Would you want one from each major area? I know Lee's got major areas and spread out in her EA too, or is somebody from, say if I chose our fire coordinator from Knutsford, she really doesn't have any ties to Pritchard. Would you be better off with two, or?
Yeah, definitely a fair comment. But as you can imagine, we could quickly have 30 or 40 people and it'd kind of be too difficult of a committee to manage. So I never said this homework project was easy. But yeah, what we're looking for is one from each electoral area. And that would be a discussion that you would have with them. Obviously, they're going to know their own community they live in the best, but you know, the intent is to have broad representation.
Director Morris?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's a follow-up to it. It's just overall skill set. So if you look at Area P, I'm just asking, are there specific skill sets that you would like brought to the table by the representative that we try and choose? I.e., if they're a retired fire person, is that useful or is in fact that difficult?
I think the piece with this is we're hoping to get a great cross-section throughout all 10 electoral areas that know their communities and their EA areas. And I know that's a big ask because definitely people are passionate and engaged within their own communities and maybe not EA-wide. Having said that, there are people out there that have that broader knowledge within their communities. And again, it's a tough task and a large kind of order to try to find somebody that fits the bill. But this committee, I foresee this as being a bit of a living, breathing thing that's going to evolve as well. So it's, you know, where we start and where we finish might look like two very different things.
Any other discussion? Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. This is a question about that report, the CRWP, whatever it is are the EA directors going to get a chance to see the draft copy of that before it goes to the province?
The piece with the CWRPs, the public engagement piece, and I can check with their contractor if they've had a component in there. I know they've obviously reached out to engage with these community meetings in mind. And at that point, that's where they're taking a lot of input to help design these reports. So that would probably give you the first opportunity to see what they've done to date, hear what your community members are concerned about, as well as your own input at that point. And then there could be another opportunity specifically if an EA director wants more input or see what's happening.
Supplemental to that, that report is due at the end of the year, as I understand it from previous meetings. And we've got public meetings going on through October. So at some point that draft is going to be submitted to you, I presume, for you to look at before it goes to the province. And I'm just wondering if that might be an appropriate time for EA directors that want to read it for their area, that they might have a chance to look at it before it heads off and becomes final.
Yeah, the question is, yeah, we might have a draft report before the meetings as well. I know it's a very tight window, and it's the regional districts, our regional district specifically, is massive. So it was a big undertaking for foresight. So they have a big team working on this, and we're really trying to cram it in a small envelope to have it done by the end of the year, because it is contingent on approval for next year's funding. So we'll work with the contractor the best we can to make that available within that tight timeline for sure.
Director Smith?
Did I hear you say that the preference would be to appoint someone, for instance, that's already a Fire Smart coordinator in your area?
That could make great sense. Absolutely. That they already kind of know the lay of the land. And I guess the next piece that it's just that collective cross section. Even though we realistically might not have one person that understands the dynamics of an entire electoral area, they're going to bring to the table what they bring, and within hopefully 10 different people, we get a pretty good understanding of what the challenges are out there.
Thank you. Any other directors' questions? Director Hooton.
I just want to comment, your nice Ford pickup at the North Thompson Fall Fair looked very nice with Fire Smart on the side.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the Fire Smart pickup has been well received throughout the regional district. Absolutely. And Chair, if there's, I do have one last thing if all the questions are done. We're good? All right, this is the big closer here. This is like on an Oprah show. Everyone gets a cup. Everyone gets a cup. So I'll pass those out.
And while he's passing that out, I'll just give some description. I don't know if people can see very well the photo up there. So that photo, that was just taken on Friday from the air. That's a home on Long Lake Road. And so that's the Rossmore fire, all the orange trees around it. So you can see here, the fire completely surrounded this property, but there was no damage to this property. So it's just a good take home around fire smarting and the importance of that and how close things can get. Yeah, I'm not sure the address of this property, but it's right at the end there near the pipeline.
Next item on the agenda is a CAO discussion presentation.
Thank you, Chair Laird. I think a lot of people already talked a little bit about this, and it's been a kind of a grueling summer for a lot of reasons. Fires being the biggest one. So I know I'll be presenting a little bit of the highlights tomorrow during the board meeting, but I think it's been just for this fire season, and I don't mean the spring fires or the spring floods, just it's been 49 days in a row now that this EOC has been kind of up and running. And when I say this EOC team, it's maybe just go to the cover page if you could for a minute. When I say the EOC team, that's the same people that are sitting in this room. So when Marnie on Friday night at 8:45 was trying to put out agendas, it's the same person that's actually doing the alert rescind or the alert order. It's Jamie that's sitting in the EOC director. It's all of our staff. So it's been a really challenging year. So no excuses. It's what we're supposed to do. It's our responsibility, and it's things that and I really do feel like we've got an amazing team in our EOC. We've got some leadership in there and some skill sets that are the envy of many regional districts. And I think that the board really appreciates that. So you'll see some of the updates tomorrow. Yeah, thank you. That being said, we're not as prepared for this week's meetings as best we could. We have staffing changes. We've had, thank you. We had staffing changes. We've got lots of things in the hopper that we're trying to deal with. So we got through a finance meeting this morning, and I think we did a pretty good job. I think the finance committee was quite happy with kind of the results. We maybe didn't get to the finish line where we were hoping to, but things happen sometimes. So this meeting, like the same, we had the one presentation with being fire smart, and that was important. So thank you for that. The next part of the presentation, or the next part of the thing, is I just would like to have a round table with this group. There's so many conversations I have with each of you, and each of you have, issues or concerns. I threw up some ideas on the screen that I'll share with you here in a moment. That just gives you a sense of some of the things that I've been hearing that we may want to talk about today. I know Chair Laird also talked to everyone about bringing up some issues, and maybe I've captured them. But I really want to have a meaningful, open discussion. It's only been 10 months. We've only had a few meetings as the EA kind of committee. There's still a lot for all of us to learn, and how getting together and working with each other. And then when you throw in spring fires and spring floods and EOC all summer, we just haven't connected like we normally would in a normal year. So I thought this is valuable time. We've got time. We've got another hour and a half in our meeting here. Why don't we have a really good conversation and try to do it in a way that we can maybe just segregate it by topic, and then maybe we can layer in the other ideas that Chair Laird would have presented to the group. So is everyone okay with that? It's not kind of a normal agenda that we would kind of roll out presentations and things like that. We just haven't had the opportunity to kind of pull things together. So everyone's okay with that?
I think we're fine with that.
Okay, awesome.
And
so yeah, we're gonna play it off the cuff here. So I want to start with number 2 actually, because Alex is here, and so maybe Alex, if you want to come up and maybe switch spots with Jason or something, that'd be great, so we can answer some questions. But just running through this, as I've kind of started to say, staff capacity and workload has been a challenge. So with everything that I've already mentioned, and it's we got to figure out a way to be more efficient and make things work, because I think these fires and floods are going to continue to happen. We know they're going to continue to happen, and making sure that we're properly managing the organization at the same time is really a challenge. So the next one I wanted to talk a little bit about was just bylaw enforcement. There's been a lot of discussions with our staff and planning and development, directly with Alex, of issues that are happening out in the electoral areas. And we just want to have a quick discussion about how you're feeling, how because we're hearing kind of from both sides, and I'm going to let Alex speak to that a little bit, but there's a lot of the directors that tend to get really involved in some of the details behind it, and that could be good and that can also be bad. And I want to just walk through some of the experiences you're having, and so and how the policy works and what your expectations are and how we can support you. So maybe Alex, if you wanted to just kind of highlight some of the things that you've been seeing and hearing, because there's been a lot of them lately. And I think even talking to the bylaw officer last week, he had 4 or 5 new complaints just last week. And there's one of him for 45,000 square kilometers. So it's a really difficult task, but so we want to just make sure we're meeting your expectations. At the same time, we want to make sure we're following the board policies. So Alex, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, and then please, I'd love your questions and feedback. So just maybe through the chair, just put your hand up and we'll do it the same way.
Sure. So maybe I'll start just by saying that the directors don't see most of the complaints that we get, right? So a lot of it is phone calls, a lot of it is in writing. Our bylaw officer visits a property and we simply deal with it. We talk it out, we find out there's a misunderstanding. So the vast majority of that work never escalates to something that an area director is involved in or that the board has to see. In cases where we do, and we have to send a letter, you can imagine that often the person who's the subject of the complaint can get quite upset, and often they turn to their area director. And so the nature is to want to support that individual who's under direct attack by the regional district is what it appears. But I think you also have to remember that there's a complainant or multiple complainants on the other side who might not be reaching out to you as well. So we're having to balance both sides until we can do a full investigation. But you might not be hearing from both sides. And so I think there's a tendency to want to help, but there's a danger in that. And if it ever escalates where we have to do enforcement action, it is risky if the area director is too much involved or too far involved. So I guess we would just ask that whenever you can, if you can direct it to staff, encourage people to contact myself directly or the bylaw officer. We're not as scary as we look. We do try to talk with people, work through problems. So sometimes they're not wanting to come to us because they'd rather talk to the area director. But I think we're quite reasonable. And if we're not being reasonable, then certainly that needs to be escalated to Scott and so on. But that kind of initial call, can you help me? It would be great if you could try to direct that to staff, and we'll do our best to try to work through those.
Questions, comments? I just want to get feedback from the team, because I think everybody in this room has been involved in some kind of a concern over the last year. So please feel free.
Yeah. Director also.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just sharing my Area A experience. Yeah, there has been quite a few cases of residents reaching out to me to fix their problems. And I've been glad that Alex and also Regina as well before, we've been able to, yeah, like you said, direct residents to staff. And I think I fairly communicated to residents and set their expectations of, I only get involved as a director when the services level are not being met by our staff in a timely manner and whatnot. So there was a few cases where, it kept sticking back to me a few times, but after, 3-4 more emails, I think we were able to resolve that. So that thank you. I think for Area A, tremendous job. Thank you.
If I could just jump into, I think it's growing pains and at the same time learning. Everyone's trying to learn a little bit more about their electoral area, and you guys are finding more and more, good things, bad things, and staff are just trying to support. So I just thought this would be a good topic. So I'm not sure if there's other examples or thoughts that other EA director.
Yeah. Director Hayward.
So I just wanted to say, because I brought something that was from the District of Barrier, and it was a person who was in the District of Barrier that I brought to the TNRD to explain to them, because they were very confused from what they were getting from the District of Barrier. And you guys did that, which I really appreciated it, because that was a person who was really upset and felt that they just needed to talk to somebody else who wasn't part of that. And I did, and you guys did, and I thank you for that, because I think that was a big one for the TNRD, really, to say that, yeah, government will listen, and sometimes you need to talk to somebody else with a different point of view sometimes. So I appreciated that from my clients. Thank you.
We, I think we pride ourselves on doing the best we possibly can and trying to find a reasonable solution. We're never gonna, as Alec mentioned, we are never going to go, right to enforcement. We want to try to work with the residents and make it work. Ultimately, we're never going to make 100% of the people happy because we still need to follow the bylaws and go through the process, but we will do everything in our power to ensure that, we're doing things right as best we can.
Director Houghton?
Yes, I was approached by a gentleman. I did a eulogy at a memorial service earlier on. And I saw this gentleman at another function, and I just heard through the grapevine, it's a situation out at Monty Creek that there's some legal ramifications between the TNRD and this fellow's business. And I don't know what they all are, but he says, Doug, come on out. I want to sit down and meet you and talk to you about it. And haven't done that yet. Because if you're involved in legal ramifications, is it my role to get in the middle of it and go? I guess it doesn't hurt to go meet. But then you got to figure out what your position is as an area director. I'm not going to get involved if you're suing because he doesn't have a permit for a gravel pit or whatever the case may be. So yeah, what are our roles?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's a matter of legal ramification, I think it's pretty serious. So you're going to want to be very careful. I think it's okay for the directors to say, I can't help you on this one. There's a matter that's ongoing, and because I'm one of the directors, I can't sit down with you and discuss it in detail. I think it's okay to tell people that there's limits to what you can and can't do. They're often turning to you because they want you to make the decision, or you want you to come in here and tell staff, change that bylaw immediately. Joe's a good guy, leave him alone. And we can't do that. So it's okay to just be upfront with people and say, I can't do that. There's a limit to what I can do. It's where we don't say those things and people are misled to say, well, if I talk to my area director, they might be able to find a way to make this work for me. And then they don't want to talk to staff at all because they know it's much easier to talk to their electoral area director. So it's okay to have a line that says, please contact staff. I can't get involved in that matter. If you don't get an answer from them, you call me to make sure, because I'll follow up if we're not responding in a proper time frame. But I would be very careful getting involved because they'll, and people, they don't mean to do it, but they do drag you into a situation. Yeah.
And just as a follow-up, you take what we're going to do in Westwold on the 25th with a public hearing. It's not a bylaw thing, but I'm kind of worried about that meeting because I've had one person phone me in favor of it, and this guy wants to do that job, and about 30 complainers that I've sent. I believe I sent you all the copies of the email. So then I just tell people come to the public hearing, and on the 25th, I'm not going to. You can't do anything beforehand. That's what a public hearing's for, and we'll hear them out, I guess, and we'll make a decision. Come forth right after the public hearing's over, but I know the town of Westwold's got two things on its mind right now, and either one of them are good.
And certainly on that, we'll have to differentiate and we'll have to explain at that public hearing that the public hearing is for that specific application, and we're here to listen to residents, and that whatever you hear at that public hearing gets brought back to the entire board, who then votes on the application. But I think that's an important point that you're bringing up. There's an example of a property owner who says, I don't want to get into the specifics of that property, but just hypothetically, property owner says, I want to do a land use that I'm not allowed to do. So rather than doing it illegally, they apply, which is their process. And we allow that process and we encourage that process. But it's a public process and there's many unknowns to it. So then staff process it, we send referrals, we collect information, we bring a report to the board. And we ask the board for authorization to go to a public hearing, because staff can't go and reach out to the public, upset them on a matter that the board hasn't even reviewed. And using that one as an example, sometimes what happens is people are already upset there was even an application submitted. How dare this person apply for something? But we have to accept it at the counter. Staff can't say this is a terrible idea, get out of here. We can't say that. We process, no, we might say, if we have board policy that says we won't support a certain land use, then we bring that up front, and an owner can still say, it doesn't matter, I'm paying my money, I want the board to review this. And we absolutely process and deal with those applications. but then let the public process carry out. That's why it's there. So we will hear from the residents, be it Westwold or another public hearing tomorrow. And that's all good and healthy because that's part of that democratic process. What the board does in making their decision after that, that's completely up to you. We staff make a recommendation, you've listened to the public, and then you make the decision from there. So that's when we have a public application process. What we're dealing with in bylaw enforcement often are people, sometimes who mistakenly use land incorrectly. They didn't know they can't do a certain use. That happens. It's genuine and they find a way to try to find a solution. In other cases, we have people who find it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. So they'd rather not go through the public hearing process. They'd rather set up shop, then a neighbor or neighbors complain, and then we have to go through this enforcement where we encourage them to either apply and go through a process for the board to vote on or cease the use. And it's in there where it gets sticky, where residents are coming to you directly saying, can you help me out here? And the answer is talk to staff. And through that process, they might apply for something, a rezoning or temporary use permit. And then there's a public hearing and so on. And that's where it's critical that you have an open mind and that you haven't engaged or gotten too far into one side until you've heard from all of the residents.
And on another note, is another situation is like what's happening down the road from me in Knutsford, that gentleman that bought that 160 acres that happens to be out of the ALR and surrounded by ALR land. And he's gone and put in that road and done what he could. And to me, he's made nothing but a mess. And now I got the neighbors coming on me. How could he do that? And I said, well, I remember back in 72, that piece of ground was not put in the ALR. I don't think he's done anything wrong. There's nothing I don't think our office can do to date. You and I have talked about it, but it's going on. He came in my driveway again on Monday after I got back from the Barrier Fair. And he said, you got to do something, Doug. I said, well, I'll go talk to Alex. But I says, I believe he's writing a letter to the Transportation and Highways because they're the ones responsible for the road going in and the road that he's building. So I know there's going to be a weed issue. We all know that. But, you and I will talk at another time, but there's another example of a guy just going ahead and doing something.
And there are also times where you have to answer that we just don't have the jurisdiction on that matter. We get calls all day. Why aren't my roads repaved? We don't have jurisdiction on roads. My neighbor's cutting a tree down. Why don't you have a tree cutting bylaw? Stop him immediately. And we say, we don't have a tree cutting bylaw. Like those are just the limits. It's not that we're being dishonest. It's honest. We don't have one. Could the board consider a tree cutting? Sure, they could. Is that a good idea over 45,000 square kilometers, telling rural people they can't cut a tree until they've applied for a permit? Maybe not, but that'll be a decision of the board. So at least half my calls are, why don't you have more regulation? Make sure my neighbor doesn't do those things that I don't want done. The other half of my calls are, I moved to a rural area to be free. Don't tell me what I can and can't do on my land. So we're trying to balance this dichotomy. And that's the challenge that we deal with. Yep.
Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alex. I wonder if you could give sort of a next steps on the recent decision that the board made to reject the fellow who was, I guess, begging for forgiveness. He didn't apply for a building permit. He built the structure in ALR land. He asked for board approval and was rejected at our last council meeting. Where does that now go? And the second part of that is that we have people who live in Cherry Creek who aren't supportive of the guy moving forward without getting approvals, but at the same time are saying realistically, this is ALR land with no irrigation. What else are we supposed to do about this? And we've talked in the past about maybe a comprehensive review of both Cherry Creek and Tobiano in terms of land use, talked around the corners of that with Regina. So if you could maybe tell us where this thing is going with the beg for forgiveness guy, and where might we go as EA directors to foster communication on future land use?
So specifically on that application, the board recommended they be denied, but it was sent to the Agricultural Land Commission, who will make their decision on it. That could take 6 months or more. When the ALC has made their decision, if they deny it, then I would expect that they will take action because it's a violation of ALR regulations. At that time, we'll probably, if the owner doesn't clean it up, have to come in for a recommendation for notice on title, something to that effect, and then we would discuss further options from there. But I would expect, because it was an application to the ALC and it's mainly a violation of their regulation, that they should enforce it if their application is turned down. And speaking more broadly about ALR, yes, that is a challenge. There's areas of the regional district that shouldn't be in the ALR. Maps were drawn in 1972 based off of, we joke that they were using crayons at the time. And in some cases that's accurate. And we have approached the ALC a few times about re-looking at their boundaries. I think they've dropped that completely. So that's off their radar. So that's something that, again, if the board feels strongly, maybe we can lobby and push the province to re-look at that. They've now taken away the ability for a private property owner to apply for an exclusion application. So you can't actually apply to the ALC to remove your land from the ALR. Only local government can do that, which would mean staff would have to go out and have a project of trying to find people's land, recommending to take it out of the ALR, which when we've tried that in other places like Whitecroft, the residents have told us clearly they don't want that because there's tax benefits to being in the ALR and they don't want local government messing with that. So it's a challenge. Then speaking just in general about looking for areas of development, I think that'll happen as we start to review some of the official community plans that we want to get to, especially the ones around Kamloops. And I think as part of that, what we want to do is try to do some long range planning and actually identify pockets where we could and should support development, areas that maybe are serviceable. Maybe there's areas where we can, where it makes sense to have development. And in exchange for that, have areas that won't be developed, that need to remain larger parcel areas where we support agriculture. So I think that'll come through some official community plans and long range planning, which unfortunately we just can't get to because we're always stuck in kind of doing the day-to-day planning and application processing.
Ready, Morris?
Oh, thank you. Just I think a simple comment. If there was a moment in our EA meetings down the road where we could role play a few of these site types of scenarios using specific scenarios, I think it'd be useful because the conversation, they're minefields that we're in when we're having those conversations. That's just a suggestion to the chair of the EA group, that maybe we have a time on an agenda that we can sort of play with that concept literally.
Did you want to make that a motion?
I think we can just take that as advice. Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate all the feedback. I hope everyone thought that was helpful. There's some things there that people just needed to maybe understand more here, because these issues they cross all boundaries. They go across the entire regional district. And I really appreciate Alex being here. He's the expert on this, and he's doing a great job in that department now, backfilling Regina. And I expect good things coming out of there. But I'm okay to move on if the group has no more questions.
No other questions?
Thanks, Alex. So the next one is not going to take long at all, but because only two of the directors in this room actually were on the board that went through that forensic audit, and I know Herb and David will tell me that it was 18 months of not a lot of fun. There was more meetings than we've ever had in our life. We went through some extremely difficult discussions and changes in policies. So with 8 of you being new, you don't have that experience. I mean, you can go onto our website and you can read the final report and you can understand all the changes we made. I think there was 65 recommendations from the auditors saying, here's what you need to go and change. And we've actually got probably 98%, 99% of that complete now. And we're very, very proud of that. So sometimes when you hear from our staff, when you hear from Chelsea, or when you hear from me and we're pushing back on something, it's for good reason. And it's just because you potentially don't know what's happened or what's changed in policy. And we try to explain that. one good example would be when receipts come in, there's got to be a purpose. There has to be exactly who was there, and it has to, you know, it has to, both receipts need to be there. And most of you are all great at that, and I think it's been really well received. But that's Chelsea's job, is to kind of monitor that and manage that. And sometimes I just feel like sometimes that we need to just make sure we have more of these discussions and make sure we're on the same page when there's an issue that comes up. Is there been any, I guess, any questions about the forensic audit in general, or kind of policies and things like that? Mike or Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I have two questions. One on the expense thing, which I'll come to in a minute, but the other is under the forensic audit, or at least when we first came in, there were some practices that were I think viewed today as incorrect or lacking. And there was one particular grant in aid, a very large grant in aid that was ongoing unless somebody withdrew from it, or one of the EA directors withdrew. I withdrew from it. I don't know where that has gone. It hasn't come up at the board level. I had asked the question several months ago whether even the current year was going to continue to be paid, because the legacy document said that there had to be 1 year's notice. So is there any update on policy related to grant and aid and fixing up those situations, or that particular situation?
Speaking of that one specifically, I know there hasn't been any update because it is still ongoing. It doesn't end until a lot of the withdrawals from the EA directors that were all public information, that is still in place until the end of this year. So then we need to bring that topic back to the board for kind of future direction on how the board wants to handle that. I can't think of another grant and aid situation that's been an issue. That one's just, unfortunately, it's kind of, there's been a lot of moving pieces in that one, and there's some things we need to bring back to the board to get direction on.
Well, and we've also lost the staff person that was front and center on that. Deanna was very much involved with that, and I want to make sure that we don't lose whatever was being done in that time period. So it's an important $80,000 is a lot of money to be sending to some organization, and I want to make sure that if the $80,000 is going to get spent in this year, that it follow the proper procedures, or otherwise it doesn't, and we take the steps that we need to do to make sure that it curtails enough.
So it is following the proper procedure right now, and I'm sure our corporate officer has probably already made the note that we need to make sure that we bring this back to before the end of the year and make sure the board is fully aware of what's going on and what the decision needs to be going forward.
Sure.
So
the second is about the expenses, and I'm gonna you and I have had discussions with Chelsea, and I.
You want to wait to the next topic, maybe, where it's expenses? Are you okay with
well,
that?
yeah, you raised it, so I'm happy to raise it at another time.
Yeah. No, I just, anything else with forensic audit though first, if I may, or just kind of, I think maybe.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mike's conversation about the grant and aid. The last conversation that I had with Deanna before she left was that there was going to be some sort of a subcommittee or some meeting towards the end of September to discuss, because I know Director Thorpe and myself were both sitting on the fence right now, whether we are or aren't going to follow Mike's decision.
Okay.
So there was a conversation around, there was possibly a hybrid model that may be going to be produced by us and them or whoever, but there was going to be a discussion about whether, so that we would have time to make up our mind before the end of this year.
Yeah, fair question. And so we'll take note of that. We'll come back and talk to those directors that are involved. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions on kind of the forensic audit or any of the learnings, or?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. So moving on then, so just expenses and budgets. I know I've talked to a handful of directors, EA directors, about expenses, and I know they sometimes gets confusing, and I know what we're going to hopefully do here in October. Carla, is that right? Is it October or November? We were thinking of Amanda's going to come back and talk about the remuneration policy as a whole, and we want to talk about how your remuneration is kind of laid out, and then what some of the expenses. So when you're at meetings, for example, there's a there's a I guess a per diem or a what do you call a stipend that you get paid for the meeting. Your travel time also has a separate fee for it, and then your mileage on top of that, any expenses. We just want to make sure. Has there been any confusion, or have you been provided the right support when it comes to expenses and how they're working? I guess that's the feedback I'm trying to get. Has there been any concerns or issues? Because I want to make sure this is as streamlined as we can make it.
Director who?
I guess I'm just a little confused on what our roles are and what we do get paid for in mileage. So I'll just use last weekend, I was asked to go to called a water fight meeting in Westwell. So I went out there and attended that, and it was the community hall was packed. Now, do we really have anything to do with water? Probably not, but the community asked me to come as their EA director. And then tonight I was asked to go to a 30th anniversary of the Pritchard Fire Chiefs get together at Pritchard Hall. Now, to my mind, I'm taking my own truck and eating gas at all these different things. Am I entitled to put that on my expenses? Because I know once I got questioned on some things that I went to, said that's, I know I went to Westwood twice when I got called during the flood, and I went out there and I believe I was turned down on my mileage, but pretty hard to say no when your constituents want you there for whatever reason. So.
No, fair question. I think that's where some of the confusion is, because currently the board policy, it's a board policy. It's not the staff policy at all. It's not administrative, but it's the board that kind of created this policy on how things are done. And they actually give in the Schedule B, they actually shows the meetings and the types of meetings that expenses are eligible for, or they could be brought to the board for permission for expenses to be paid. And we need to clean that up. So I'm not sure, Herb or David, if you have kind of maybe some perspective from the last board, because this board is doing things a little bit differently. And that's within their purview. But we need to make sure that the entire board is aligned with how we're going to pay expenses and how we set the budget for that. Because ultimately, it's staff's job to manage the budget according to the policies, and that's what we're trying to do. But if there's feedback, we should get on that right away and make sure that we're adjusting the budget, adjusting the policy to ensure that the entire EA directors and the entire board are aligned.
So just make it. We were always paid to attend community events. If we've been asked as an EA director to be involved, or if we have a meeting with a community group within our area, we've always submitted our mileage for that expense.
Right. And
I'm expecting that is to continuing. And the other concern I heard was that our travel costs included all other meetings, whether it was to go to UBCM or any of the other two basically municipal gatherings. It all came out of the one budget, and we've always got paid separately for those three individual meetings that we go to. So, and I've heard that now that it's all included in the one amount that's allocated for travel.
Thank you for that, Carla. Are you able to just speak to a little bit more to kind of how each expense is defined?
Thank you. I just was trying to bring up a quick look here. So I would say, first off, in the legislative budget, there's an EA director budget. There's also a director budget. There's travel indemnity. Travel indemnity is your time that you're paid for your time to travel. That's paid through payroll. There is a travel expense. The travel expense is broken out into your travel following the policy for meetings. There's also travel included in there that would be discretionary in nature. That was not something that was typically in the list of items. So as I'm waiting for my system to bring up this information for me to look at, there is
two areas right now that I'm aware that there are travel budgets. That has not been changed and the budget amounts weren't adjusted. There could possibly be a new person in the position that's coding. And I should actually back up on that a little bit. I think for travel for FCM and SILGA, they are separate when we looked at that. So overall, the budget should be ample if we are following the same expenditure processes that we were before. So nothing there is intentionally changed.
Could you tell me what the maximum amount of travel expense per director?
So under the policy, discretionary travel is set at $2,000 for an EA director and $500 for a municipal. But it's hard with the policy that's there because point number 5 says no director will travel to, or there will be no expense for a director other than what's in the approved list. So if you're being paid to go to a community meeting that is not in the approved list, we're making an interpretation in the bylaw that actually goes against point 5 of the policy. So it's not easy to interpret, and depending on who's reading it, the interpretation could be a little bit different. So there is a discretionary travel portion that is specific, gives you a limit of $2,000 for travel. But bullet 5 says you still need approval for any travel that's outside of the approved options.
It's contradictory, and it's causing some issues because as finance and our EA staff are kind of monitoring and trying to make sure that we're doing everything according to policy, there's just been some miscommunication. So we need to get this figured out, but wanted to have this discussion to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Director Graham, you had a comment?
Thank you. The way I've always understood it, that there was that $2,000 for EA travel within our area. Nothing to do with traveling to UBCM or SILGA. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I think I misled Director Grenier on that when I mentioned it.
Yeah, and we don't need to have time for travel within our area because it's so close. But to travel to UBCM and SILGA and FCM, whatever, you're spending a lot of time in that traveling. Where does that get paid up now? It used to be on a form that you could put in how much time you spent.
There's a separate budget for conferences for SILGA, for FCM, and for UBCM. And as you know, we choose who goes to FCM. All the EA directors go to UBCM, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Yep. And then SILGA, I think all the EAs are typically go for that. So we do have a separate budget, I've learned now, that's specifically for that.
Okay, I accept that, but how do I see, how do I put in how much time I spent traveling? Surely you're not going to go into each director and say, well, you spent 4 hours here, it was 5 for you and 6. Is that how you do it?
No, it's just based on mileage. So you would put your mileage in going to SILGA, for example, just like you would coming to a meeting here.
So you'd know how many hours you spent in travel?
No, you would only get the kilometer per diem.
You don't get time.
The only time you get, so it's confusing terminology. The only time you get time for travel is when you're coming to and from dedicated meetings of the board. So that's board meetings, committee meetings, committee of the whole, that sort of thing. And that's why we want to maybe pull this together and do a remuneration review in the fall here to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. We're not in a bad spot right now. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding all the feedback so we can make sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay, one other question about the travel, the $2,000 for EA travel. Most of the time I wouldn't use it or even a portion of it, but the communication run out far before the end of the year. So can't we switch it a little bit?
We can't unless the board changes the policy. And that's my recommendation is the board needs to look at their policy. Because right now the limits for communication are 1,500 and 750, I believe it was, right? So 1,500 for the EA directors.
17?
Oh, there it is. Our EA directors are 1,500 and municipal directors are 750. And when I say communication, that it would be cell phone or internet really are the two.
That's right. And those prices have gone up.
Right, so maybe that's something that
we
needs to
need
be
change-
reviewed.
I think we need to change that.
And maybe mileage, like you said, maybe 2,000 is
yeah,
too
we're
much.
back to
Maybe we
mileage.
need to just change that up.
Absolutely.
But certainly that's some of the things, that's the whole purpose of me bringing this up, because I wanted to get some feedback.
Thank you.
Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Scott. I think the policy is perhaps being misunderstood at the staff level, and I'll back that up by saying here is the policy. Number one, the guiding principle: local elected officials should not themselves be expected to pay expenses that are incurred in order to perform their duties. So we can talk about what are our duties or what are not, but we get to a section called 3, which is called discretionary travel allowance. The word discretionary is in there. It isn't us going to the board to get pre-authorization. It's the EA's discretion, and the EA then backs that up with a submission to staff about who they met with, how far they went, what the purpose was. But it's the discretion of the EA director who gets elected and has to stand for whatever submissions and expenses they put in and submit. He has to defend that to his constituency, and he has to travel to meet the constituency. In some cases, for instance, up in the North Valley, they don't have high-speed internet. I can't download a big file to them. They asked me to go personally. It's a half-day travel. And in section 3, it says, in addition to travel expenses related to attendance at meetings outlined in Schedule B being the UBCM and the SILGA policy. So in addition, electoral area directors are entitled to submit per kilometer expense claims for travel to and from meetings within their respective electoral area or meetings directly related to business of the electoral area. Later on, it defines 3.2, the per kilometer the charges, and then what has to happen in 3.3 talks about a logbook of meetings with details as to place, date, and purpose of each trip. 3.3b says the maximum annual claim per electoral area director for travel expenses is $2,000. When you look at section 3, I think that $2,000 is related to discretionary travel allowance, the heading, and I think it lays out a very clear policy about how a director would go about submitting a claim for that. They would fill out the form that Chelsea has asked us to fill out. We would say who we met with, whatever the purpose was, and I don't think we should be I think it's the EA director's discretion to make that, and they have to live within currently a $2,000 limit for the year for those kinds of travels, quite separate from the Schedule B meetings. And I think that if there was some misunderstanding that the $2,000 was to include both SILGA and discretionary, we certainly don't have enough to. I don't feel we have enough to meet our constituents' needs. We need to jump on that fairly soon because we're coming halfway up through the year. I'm quite confident that my expenses will be within the $2,000 if it's discretionary, but if it's including SILGA and UBCM and other conferences, yeah, I'm going to blow over.
Yeah. And so, like I said, there's a separate budget for those conferences, and I misspoke
okay
on that.
So the $2,000 is for the discretion of the director, and that when they submit the claims, if they don't submit who they met with or they don't provide proper detail, fair enough. But I don't think that this should be a Spanish Inquisition about why the director submitted a claim. He's the one that, or she's the one that's responsible for who they met with and submitting the claim. And I think it should be accepted by staff that that's the EA director deciding what to do and how to do it. Doug and I had to go. We've had wildfires in our area. We don't get hung up about whether the wildfire's on my side or his side. We traveled together. We went to Lac Lejeune where we had community members delighted to see us. We traveled to the Frolic Cattle Company. Again, people delighted to see us. We shouldn't be sitting here wondering whether or not, that 150-kilometer trip will be covered or not. We should be going because our constituents want us to go, and we need to make those decisions now And if policy one is to be believed that, you know, expenses are incurred in order to perform their duties, if we consider those our duties, then we should be going and we should be accepting of that within the current $2,000 limit.
So I don't disagree with a lot of your points. Just help me understand how you would interpret section 5 then, because that's the one that's causing angst, because it's completely contrary to what 3 says.
I think if you interpret section 5, then you dismiss the entire section 3. Because section 3 very specifically says this is discretionary travel. The $2,000 amount isn't in 5, it's in section 3.
Totally, but it's a general point. So that's the part that's confusing for us. And that's why we feel like the board needs to review this and make sure that right decisions are made. Like I said, this is a board policy. We could administer it. We just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Early in this year, Lee specifically asked the board to approve a policy for travel to a certain function that she was attending.
Yeah.
And the board, of course, supported that. But in this particular case, discretionary travel, I think if EA directors are certainly within the current limitations and have decided that it's important, I think that it should be accepted once the information is submitted in the expenses. And I think if we want to have a review of policy or limits or want to tighten up the language in section 5, I think we're stifling EA directors if we are saying right now, gee, you're not going to be paid if you go to Lac Lejeune or talk to the constituents at Frolic. That's on your own nickel. I think that's the wrong interpretation of the current policy.
And so that's why I'm encouraging the board to bring this up for a review of the board, because the board needs to approve this, not staff. We just basically monitor the policy and follow the policy, and that's where the interpretation is lost. So totally agree. We just need to review it and make sure we're all on the same page.
CFO Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Through to the EA directors. As the CFO, I'm tasked with being one of the people that interprets and makes decisions and guides staff on policies and bylaws that you set. I'm telling you that there are people within our staff that have different interpretations, and we are bringing it forward because there is an issue with the interpretation. Staff aren't here to tell you what you can spend or can't spend. Staff are empowered to follow your policies and bylaws. The problem we have coming in on the heels of the forensic audit is that your staff just went through a lot of scrutiny and felt held accountable and scrutinized within the public. A lot of them are afraid to make the wrong decision and have that happen again. So it's my job to protect my staff. It's my job when I see conflict in interpretation to ask for your guys' support to make sure it's clear. Point 5 negates point 3. We agree. There's a problem. When I start to see that we are following different practices than we have before, the only thing that worries me is you've taxed a certain amount for a budget. And if all of a sudden we're doing something than we did before, we might go over that budget. So I want to flag that it could be an issue if all of a sudden there's a different interpretation and we're paying out a lot more money. So if we know that now, we can bring it forward, we address, make a policy change and make sure that our staff are able to follow the policy the way that you would like it to be followed. But right now there's an issue.
Director Harwood.
So I'm on, wrong person, right person? I did, yeah. Okay, so I'm on the other side because I obviously got stuck between 5 and 3 because when I first came on as a director, I inquired of a staff person what I could charge and what I couldn't. And I was told I could only charge on official meetings or if I was officially sent to an event. So all those other little things I've been running around doing, I don't keep any track of it. So I'm doing it the other way, right?
Yeah.
So,
and see, that's why we're bringing this up, because there's some folks in here that are doing it one way and there's some folks that are doing it another way. And we wanted clarity. That's all. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So I've talked to a handful of the EA directors in here, and that's been the case. Is they only do official meetings, and they don't necessarily, because they're looking at 5 and it's contradictory and we need to fix it. So that's our whole point in bringing this up. So we can rectify everything, we can reconcile everything. We just need to make sure we have clear direction so our staff can follow the policy of the board.
I'm with Ms. Fox and with Director Hayward. I've been doing the exact same thing. I thought 5 negated 3. So anything that I've been doing on my own in terms of going and meeting with people when they've requested it, or any of the community meetings I've held, I've been doing that on my own dime because it seemed to me that we had to get special permission to do it. Yeah. So that's how I've been interpreting it.
So we need to fix that. And so we acknowledge that. We will bring that forward. I just want to make sure that we're aligned, because I think half you were doing it one way and half we're doing the other. So, and when we follow the same practice as we've had in the years past, staff only know kind of what's been going on in the past, and we continue to follow that. So we will fix this, rest assured.
I have one question is, once you get the policy sorted out and the directors that have traveled and attended meetings in their areas, is there a retroactive opportunity for payment?
Certainly, we'll have to, once the entire board approves whatever changes are proposed, then we will make sure that we make sure people are looked after as the policy states. But we need to get that done this year, and that's why we're bringing it up now, is just to ensure that we're there. So,
Director Grenier.
One further thing, when you're reviewing the policies and what have you, I looked at what municipal directors are getting for travel, municipal directors in the TNRD. And I understand in the city of Kamloops, if I've got this wrong, please correct it, but I think city of Kamloops directors get $5,000 from the city of Kamloops, quite apart from $500. I think Ashcroft is $4,000, and I think the others are unspecified. But when you consider that EA directors, I have 3,300 square kilometers that I have to cover. City of Kamloops is less than 300 square kilometers. So they've got $5,000 within their municipality, plus another $500. We have $2,000 to cover, in my case, 3,300 square kilometers. So to be effective EA directors, particularly in areas that don't have high-speed internet, don't have cell coverage, sometimes our ability in the far distance areas has to be face-to-face. So I think that maybe reflecting on what other municipalities in the TNRD are doing might be useful in coming to some determination as to whether 2,000 is the right number, 1,000 is the right number, 5,000 is the right number, something that has got some relativity, along with the fact that EA directors have to have some way to do their internet, their cell phone, all of the services that they have to pay for. My Starlink satellite alone is more than the 12 months is more than the allowance in here, let alone my iPhone 8, let alone the plan for the iPhone 8. So if we're going to be effective EA directors in communication and face-to-face, minimizing the expense of traveling by car, we have to look at all of these things relative to the other municipalities.
So we can certainly share all that information, but the board will have to make that decision on what the right numbers are.
Director Morris.
Very quick point. I was just going to suggest that in the deliberation of ideas would be possibly recognizing emergency situations, for example, that we've been in just recently, where that ability to do extra visits to areas tied to that would be sort of one-time things that could be added to the policy as needed.
I think that's something we should bring up for sure and be considered. So the whole purpose in bringing this up was just to exactly have this conversation. So was there another question? Sorry.
Chair.
When I reviewed a Ashcroft bylaw, it said $4,000 for representatives at Village of Ashcroft, in addition to the TNRD amount. And I could only find 2 of our TNRD municipalities that had a number.
beyond my stipend, which is $12,620 a year. That's it. I get the expenses if I probably use them or so, but all the different places.
I believe the $4,000 number is an upside number that you would be entitled to apply for. I've got the policy and I intended to send it to our staff, all the policies of the municipalities that could find. I couldn't find some municipalities that had any policy, but I thought if I'm incorrect, I'm incorrect.
That's the one the government's quote spend or the budget for going to UBCM and so that for training opportunities. So LGLA, so did UBCM. Those are the only things. No other expenses.
Thank you for the conversation. We'll get it right. Sorry if there's another question.
Yeah, just one last quick point. Is there a separate expense form for discretionary expenses?
No, it's the same. It's the same form that you would.
Because I haven't put in, I've never seen anything about that. So yeah, it's news to me.
So we need to do an education session and we need to get things figured out. So.
I just have a comment about the form that we fill out regularly. It is so compressed. And when you look at the fact that it's only that you put out on that form is your travel to and from and any possible meals. And it's such a tight line. I can't even get it in there in one line. So why can't we look at doing a proper, easy to fill out form that includes all of the different expenses that we've been talking about, whether it's a meeting or a travel time, like all the expenses that we're entitled to as area directors. Can we not get a better form?
Carla can respond to that.
Thank you. One of the first things I was tasked with was changing your last form because it wasn't good enough. So this form for sure was made mainly to fill out electronically. Because when we have forms that are filled out electronically, we actually can write scripts in Excel that pull out all the data for us. But because a majority of the directors don't fill out electronically, we pull out and manually have to do all the work. So if the directors are continuing to write on the form, of course, I could see that you would need more space. I think the original intent was that it was going to be more beneficial to do it electronically and be a bit less manual. But obviously, we certainly can relook at trying to give you a form that gives you more room to write on. And also in this whole investigation of expenditures, from my perspective, having a column with discretionary broken out would be really helpful because it's all under travel. And now when we're trying to find if we've hit limits, it's not easy to find. So again, discovering new ways to sort the information will be more helpful. Thanks.
Director Morris.
Thank you. Through to Carla, I guess, or CFO Fox. First of all, I really like filling out the electronic form, and I think if it creates more work for the staff, then the director should change the way that they are doing their expense accounts, and you guys should make it as seamless as possible. And then also a question to you: when I fill out or a director fills out the mileage portion, the time is automatically calculated because of that, and then we get paid that way, correct?
That's correct. The form is set up that when you key in the numbers, it adds things together for you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thank you.
Looking at the time, I think we need to move along.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really, I just have just two more here. Policies, we've already kind of talked about that, but since this is the first time that the EA directors have been really inundated with this EOC and emergency management thing, I just wanted to know, how has the communication been? Are you feeling like you're involved enough? I just want to know what's working, what's not working is really what I want to understand, because we feel like that daily communication that I send out, or Corbin or Jamie send out, or Deanna in the past, really gives you the highlights, and then we call individually the people that are being impacted, and we do that on a very consistent basis. So I just wanted to get your feedback because this is the first time many of you, 8 of you, have gone through kind of emergency situations like this. So just thoughts?
Director Hooton?
Well, being my first kick at the cat at this and attending the EOC office various times throughout the, I guess you call it the Rossmore fire that has plagued both Director Grenier and myself, and a little bit with Mr. Director Laird on the other end. I've got nothing but praise for every daily update that we've got, whether it be from the communications people or directly from Jamie one-on-one, or from Kevin or from Mike or somebody within Robson or Mike Deedles or whomever. You look at the quality and the vast amount of the staff, and I'll just take the agriculture perspective. You had some very qualified people that could talk the lingo with folks that phoned in from our constituencies that needed help. They didn't say, oh, where do you live? What's cows? Oh, we don't talk cows. Well, they say, talk Terry Devick. Terry's looking after the cows. And all those kind of things. And I've heard praise from even within wildfire management discussions that we've had, getting our local people involved on how superior our system is and our neighboring constituents are down the road. And for being the first time, I've only had one neighbor come down at me, and Jamie knows who that is. Her and I don't see eye to eye at the best of times. And I don't know if it was a dig towards me or if they're really unhappy with the communications of the wildfire service and TNRD. Like I said to Jamie, I'm not responding to that. If I did, you wouldn't want to read the letter. So other than that one, I've got nothing but praise. And you've been first class during this whole thing since it started. When is it, 50 days ago or whatever it is? Thank you.
I have nothing but praise too for you guys. You're all awesome. I found it refreshing to be able to send an email or call and get a clean answer right away. No questioning about, do you know what you're talking about? This kind of thing. That part, the respect to trust that what I had to say, that you trusted that I was telling you the right thing and you were giving me the information that I could give my people. And especially when the back of my ranch was blazing away wonderfully. I mean, it was really nice to know what else was going on in the world so I could look after other people as well. So I thank you guys for that.
Director Hustle.
Thank you, Chair. And building on Director Houghton's comments, Area A has been fortunate this season. We've been relatively quiet. So that allowed me to poke my nose into other stuff. Case in point, Ms. Lawrenson, she reached out, and had, again, nothing but praises, compared to, again, sorry, not to throw on other districts under the bus. I've had many comments that, comparative to other regional districts, TNRD leads the way. So just wanted to thank you guys for that.
Thank you for that. I just to respond to that quickly is that it's not always been the case. There's been lots of learning, and I know that we've evolved a lot since over the years, and we continue to try to get better and better. But I appreciate all the comments.
Thank you. I really appreciate the one-on-one communication, like calling and letting us know what's happening. Much appreciated. One thing I was talking to Corbin about today is there is a bulletin that's put out. There's one, for example, for the Canyon Complex fires, and it's fantastic. And I'm wondering if maybe, I'm pretty sure that TNRD is getting it. I'm wondering if maybe we could add that into the directors getting it too. I think there might have been one for the Bushmore fires or whatever. The Canyon Complex one, it listed all the fires, how many people were on it, what was going on, what they had done the previous day, what the expectation of the weather was. It's a great tool to pass on to residents that are wanting to know what's going on.
Yes. There was, when we send out that situational report, a lot of times on the right side, there's links to each of those, but it might be easier if we were just to send out the document is what you're suggesting. So,
yeah, it was just, it was added as an attachment, super simple to access.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Director Grenier, and then next. Yes. I do know that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that happened with this Rossmoor Lake fire is that there was a lot of conversation back and forth I had with Director Houghton. What is our role? What is it that we should be doing as EA directors? Early on in that fire, I asked, can I come in and, observe or participate in the EOC meetings? It was suggested that no, I can't. But the feedback loop, you're reporting back to me as an EA director was important. And over the course of time, that's where I felt that I could insert my comments back from my constituents to the EOC that might then get raised in the EOC BC Wildfire Service discussions. Things like, why is that provincial park still open? Well, it's in an alert area. And of course, the sign ended up going up and there was some healthy discussion, as I understand. That was a feedback from some of our people. Structural protection. A lot of folks in Lac Lejeune were telling Director Hott and myself, boy, we'd really like to see some structural protection. That fire is only 2 kilometers away. And that got raised a couple times with a little more reinforcement along the way. And lo and behold, we saw some major structural protection that showed up. So I'd like to hope, but maybe confirm, that the feedback from the EA directors through the EOC to people like BC Wildfire Service is also effective. Because what other channel do we have as EA directors, since there's no formal process for us within the EOC, I think.
How you described that was exactly right. So the formal process or the formal structure of an EOC is this board, and all the EA directors are known as the policy group. So it's no different than the board in administration. You provide the high level policy and direction. So when you have questions like that, I know we've had conversations with Doug, and he had, he's lived there and knows that land like nobody else. And he'd give us advice. We'd pass that along through the EOC director, and we're talking to the incident commander. But that's exactly the process. Is your feedback comes through myself or Corbin or Jamie or the EOC director, and then we take that and run. And that's typically how how it works, and it's been working well.
And just supplemental to that, we had a meeting at Lac Lejeune, a public meeting. And I think it was very useful that I was able, as the EA director, to introduce the EOC and to introduce the BC Wildfire Service, not to sort of upstage them, but to indicate to our constituents that we were part of a feedback loop system and that we were here to share these people's view on the fire and on the Emergency Operations Center. So in the future, I think it's very important that the EA director be part of those public interface meetings. I think it was a very constructive approach to include the EA director, and Director Houghton got up and was able to say some things too at that meeting. So
that is the process, is to make sure any public communication is led by whatever EA or whatever municipality is there. So that's always been our intent, and we'll continue to do that.
You want to respond?
Yeah, if I could chime in on this discussion as well, and agree with the comments that were just made. I think to follow up on Director Grenier's comments about, I think you started off by asking, what is our role of the EA director? And I think I could summarize that by saying your role, what we need from you is to listen to your constituents and then communicate back to us what you're hearing. So if I can be more blunt, it's not to promise anything or commit to anything or to direct anything, but what's really valuable for us and hard for us to do from the EOC here on the 3rd floor is knowing what's happening on the ground. So, and many of the room have talked to me on a regular basis about, okay, we have an issue at this security checkpoint. This is what we're hearing, that there's confusion or inconsistency around who's getting through, or there's real panic of people feeling that they should be on evacuation alert, but they aren't. So whether or not we're going to necessarily act on what you're hearing will be a discussion that we'll have internally and communicate out to you guys. But it's very helpful for us to hear what you're hearing on the ground, because I'll say it straight out that you're hearing more from your residents than we are in the EOC most of the time. It's actually surprising, and it seems to change depending on the event and depending on the community. But often we'll have, multiple properties on evacuation order, sometimes dozens, if not hundreds, and our phone's not ringing. And we're wondering, what are people doing? What are people feeling? We don't always hear directly from them. So if you can engage with us on a regular basis, that's the best way. And don't feel like you're bothering us with that important information. And we like hearing it. We want to know what's happening on the ground. And for example, going back to the evacuation order example, we issue an order. We know sometimes everyone leaves, sometimes nobody leaves. And sometimes you guys will hear that sooner than we will, because you're communicating directly with those residents, or those residents personally, and we don't.
Director Onslow.
Just a question for years in the future and the staff levels that you have in the EOC. So as summers happen and these emergencies seem to be happening more and more often, how is the staff able to continue juggling 2 full-time jobs, if not basically a 3rd full-time job, and, limiting the burnout, but also managing the utility system and making sure that the works get done in other towns that aren't on fire and aren't in emergencies? And so myself as a director in Area B, we weren't affected by fires this year. But if I had a question regarding the utility system and the length of time that it's taking for something to get done, I feel guilty because I know that you guys are overworked in the EOC. So I have a hard time understanding how you guys are managing it, I guess. And then what would the plan be for the future?
So the EOC manages we prioritize the EOC director and the logistics officer. They prioritize to make sure that our bases are covered in our organization. So if Tyrone is working, for example, from utilities, we make sure that, the second in command is there. We try to do that in all of our departments to make sure that we have still coverage in every department. Because that's a priority. We got to keep our business operating. There's some things that have to get delayed because they may not be as important, but we also reach out to community members. So I know Director Hott was talking about we'd reach out to the province and out to even businesses in the community, that they come and become experts and we work with ag, and they come and sit on our EOC because they have the knowledge of the area as well. We also reach out to other municipalities. So for example, the CAO of Ashcroft came in for a few days. So Daniela was in, she spent 2 or 3 days with us to not only learn, but also just support and allow people to take breaks. So I know that's a big focus, that we make sure that people get time off. Even Kevin Skrepnik, you would think he was here for the entire 50 days, but he still got a day or 2 here and there to make sure he could refresh and get back in. So Jamie, I don't know if there's anything to add, but we certainly prioritize that and do our best to keep the wheels on the bus.
We gave Kevin a whole week off.
Oh, recently, yeah.
But yeah, just I guess another follow-up to that. Years like this year, I will say they're not. Let me back up. Every year we activate our EOC at least once, if not multiple times, on and off. But those smaller activations of the EOC, we do not pull people from other departments. We could manage those within the Community Emergency Services Department. So we have Mike Knopf, his full-time job is emergency management. So he's devoted to that. And then Kevin, part of his portfolio, his regular job is there. And then within the Community Emergency Services Department, we have enough trained staff and flexibility within their schedules to deal with those smaller activations. So just because you hear the EOC's activated doesn't mean that we're instantly pulling staff from all different departments. It's only in scenarios like 2023, 2021, 2017, 2009, 2003, where it was all bets were off and we had, 15, 20 people working the EOC instead of 4 or 5. Yeah. So
there's some years where it's all hands on deck and we just absolutely need the support. So, but then there's years that we get away with very few. So yeah, we just keep our fingers crossed, but we do the best we can, but I appreciate the question. Thank you.
I just I would imagine that we will be getting a full report on the EOC operation, the cost of operating, and recovery funds that are expected. Well, that will be coming to the board meeting.
Yeah, well, once the EOC is done, we do a debriefing meeting, so everybody comes in, provides feedback. We tally all that up, but there will be I'm not sure we do a report, but we certainly follow up with kind of the end result and what happened for the EOC. If you remember last time, I think we did like an infographic that talked about how many alerts, how many orders, how many properties were impacted, what kind of dollars actually flowed through here through task numbers and claims. So all that information gets compiled. Thank you.
Director Hooton.
Just to inform the board, the British Columbia Cattlemen's Association have worked with BC Wildfire Service, and they have 52 what they call ranch liaison personnel throughout the province of British Columbia. And what their role is in each of these areas is they go to the 7 o'clock meetings at the Wildfire Service, put on every evening to have an update what happened that day and what's happening tomorrow. And then they reach out to the ranching clientele within the fire area. So you take like the Rossmore fire, everybody from Lac Lejeune to Stump Lake that was involved that course of that fire. Terry Devick was appointed by Noreen Park or Noreen Chutter. No, she's not Chutter anymore. She's back to Park. Noreen Park that heads it up and appointed Terry to look after this particular fire zone. And that included the Adams Lake fire zone. And so he would, on a daily basis, Terry would phone me and say, okay, I talked to so-and-so and so-and-so. I think those bases are covered. Here's what they're doing. And I think that worked very well. And within our fire zone in the Knutsford area, we have our own Knutsford Fire Watch. We have a 25-year RCMP retired veteran who heads that up. Very great at communication. You know who she is. She likes to stay quiet. She doesn't want to get in front of the press, this office has communicated very well with her. Then on a daily basis, she communicates with everybody within the community that is part of Knutsford Fire Watch. And nobody outside the community can join that. So on a daily basis, in the morning and the evening, she'll give an update. So the communication level within I'll just pick Knutsford because there's other areas too, has worked very well. So there again, the whole communication thing. I think the biggest decision we had to make, I think I phoned you personally on this, Jamie, is, okay, we had that magic meeting at Lac Lejeune and we were having quite a bit of trouble with the fire on the south end. And all of a sudden, well, you had one of these open town hall meetings, Lac Lejeune. We need one at Knutsford Hall. And the people were starting to get worked up about the word backburn. And I think that's probably the biggest sticker that we had all fires, that term or prescribed burn. And so I think with Jamie's help, I had to communicate back to a few constituents and actually go against them. And well, I'm not going to say who they were, but I said, no, I don't think this is a place for a town hall meeting. Because I said, one major ranch south of us is where they want to do the backburn. So I said, I highly suggest you talk to Mr. So-and-so who happens to own that ranch. I'm pretty sure he will be the one controlling with the BC Wildfire Service where the backburn will go. It won't be you or I or me or anybody that's neighborly that's going to tell Mr. So-and-so where they can have the prescribed burn. I think prescribed burn started out at over 1,000 acres. I think at the end of the day, if it even happened, was 20. And that was there again. And I stood back and I said, no, we're not going to do that. Well, I got chastised quite a few times on the social media, but that's okay. I'm big boy, I can take it. So, as a role, I tried to please both sides, but use common sense and not just go have a town hall meeting, because I've seen those be public suicide too. So leave it at that. Thank you.
If there any other discussion around the EOC and where we're at?
I just have one topic left. And then of course, hopefully I've covered a lot of maybe your items you had, but just support and expectations. It's been 10 months for all of you. Hopefully you're still okay with what you signed up for. You're in it for another 2.5, 3 years. But how are things going? What's working for you? What's not working for you? I just wanted just some feedback on how are things going both for yourself and maybe from our perspective. Is there something we could be doing differently or better? So just wanted to open up that for discussion.
I've asked the directors to come up with a couple of items from each of their areas that they would like assistance with or have a problem solving. So I think we'll start off.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Support and expectation. Area A, I just had a actually meeting with Sherry Madden and just going over how actually we're kind of on autopilot. Everything's going good. Well, and even with the exception of, I wouldn't say an exception, it's going good, but it's just could be more better understanding by some residents with the Ravenby water system. But even then, there's only so much we can educate and be proactive with information, but people just time. Yeah. And then in terms of support, Corbin, thank you very much. I think, you know, in your short time here already, you already made an impact on my area. There was one topic recently where I would have ran in one direction and hey, actually, we've been talking about this with the First Nation. Maybe they wanted to go another direction. So it saved me a lot of time pulling in different directions. So I think from staff support, I have nothing but praise. Yeah.
Director Thorpe, you have
I was scared he was going to do
that.
Avoid eye contact. It didn't work. Okay. I'm actually quite happy with the way everything's been going with staff. I think they've been pretty supportive. I do have a couple of minor things that, and it's might be just the newbie thing. One of them would be, I know that Thompson River Estates is looking at fire protection and it's important to them. And we've got an issue where it might potentially be done with one of the First Nations bands, but there's this 13-kilometer issue. From what I'm getting from the residents, they're not so concerned about the 13-kilometer issue as an insurance. They're more concerned about actually having the fire protection. So I'm not quite sure how we move that forward, but I think it's important to the residents rather than just saying, no, sorry, 13 kilometers. I think it's a discussion we need to have in a meeting. So that's one minor thing. The other one is sometimes, this is me, I ask a question and it turns out that no, we don't deal with that. I'm learning. But when we don't deal with that, maybe if you could point me in the direction of who or how I would go about maybe advocating, even though it's not a TNRD issue, there's probably somebody I can either pass it off to or, you know, have some kind of communication so I don't just go back to the resident with a flat out no. Nobody likes to hear no. They like to hear a solution of some kind.
Yep.
Like I said, they're not big issues, but just a couple of things to point out. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, Director Smith.
Random order. Thank you, Chair. I guess the two main issues that I hear on a daily basis are why can't you fix our roads? And we have no communication. And I know both of those are basically provincial jurisdiction, but they are always happening in the TNRD. And I'm struggling with dealing with MOT and with the CRTC or TELUS or anybody else regarding future communications that may or may not be coming our way. So I guess if I'm asking, I'd like to see more involvement from the TNRD, if possible, in the way of advocacy. I mean, I'm dealing with 4 issues with MOT right now, and I'm 0 for 4. So I don't like losing. So I need to have a little bit more help on the back end, I guess. I have involved Jackie Taggart's office and anybody else that will listen to me, but I kind of feel that it is happening in the TNRD, even though it is a provincial issue, that the TNRD should be able to be more involved or a little bit higher up the pecking order. I just don't feel that I'm getting the respect that the TNRD deserves when I go after an issue with MOT, for instance. So I don't know if that's something within that I'm missing, or maybe I need some more guidance as to how I should handle those issus.
That's a fair point, and I think between myself and Corbin, I think we might be able to help you. Corbin, in his short time here, has made some amazing relationships with a lot of the staff side of the provincial government. So everywhere from deputy ministers, assistant deputy ministers, all the way through some of their management team. So we might be able to, depending on the issues, be able to help push that through, or at least get you talking to somebody that can maybe make a decision. And if they can't make a decision, at least give you the reason why, so that you could follow up with your residents. But reach out to Corbin and we can try to help you with both those things. The other thing on communication is our connections with TELUS and with the other big carriers, as well as some of the smaller carriers. They're always looking for opportunities, and maybe they just are overlooking something that we need to connect with them and help them understand. So connect with us and we'll do our best to help.
Perfect. And I guess lastly, I'd like to see a little bit more promotional material made available to the directors. So just like this sort of thing, when I go to a community meeting, I'd like to have something that I can leave behind, or promote the TNRD a little bit more than just my smiling face.
That's not enough.
In some cases.
I would suggest that if that's something that's important to this group, is that during budget, we need to make sure that Ms. Fox knows that we get support of the board, because whether it's hats or cups or something like that, it's just something that in the past we used to have mounds and mounds of it, and during the forensic audit it became an issue. And so we've been to be honest, we've been gun shy to spend any money outside of what we need to spend it on. But I think there's opportunities for some valuable communication when using some TNRD branded stuff, swag. Yeah, so we just need to do it properly, and I would suggest that we bring that up during budget. Maybe there can be a small amount that we allocate towards that, because I think it's important.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Director Graham has been asking me for a hat for the last 5 years, and he still hasn't got one.
No waiting.
We got lots of toques. Give it to Director.
Okay, next on the Director Ansel. Yeah.
Okay, I have my two subjects. So one of them is being in Blue River. I feel like we might be the furthest from the center. Yeah. And so one of the concerns is the timeliness of services that we get. So an example is the generator that's in Blue River right now that was donated to us from Trans Mountain, but it still hasn't been hooked up. And I know there's a lot of different reasons behind that, one of them being the budget for that, and also that we just had some operational concerns on it, but it has been a very long time. And the constituents feel that the TNRD does not react in a timely manner to things within that community. And so I would like to have the ability to say, well, absolutely we do, and things are done in a timely manner, but what is acceptable? You know, what's acceptable to the TNRD, what's acceptable to the constituents. So the opinion of people that live in these outlying communities is that they just do not get the reaction time that other communities would get. And I understand that, absolutely. So that's just one thing to bring to the attention.
Fair point.
Yeah, and then the other one was essentially hashed out earlier when we were talking about the mileage. So I know you and I, Scott, had talked about VARTA and discretionary funding. So I won't take up much time on that. I feel that that's been answered. But one other thing too, sorry, would be developing relationships with the Simp First Nation and actually getting some help from the TNRDs. So I don't, like, maybe there's education that could be provided to us, or introductions, or anything like that, because right now I haven't had any communication, and I think it's very important that I do, but I don't know how to go about doing that.
So I can give you a quick answer on that. Corbin's been working hard on that relationship as well. And so actually, Corbin, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to Lee, that would be helpful. And you're going to hear a lot more tomorrow during the board meeting on some of the training opportunities that we're doing for the board and some of the other making connections and building relationships with First Nations. I just was looking quickly. Are you on the policy committee?
No.
No. Okay. So we're going to talk about it there, but Corbin will be able to fill you in as well.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you. Director Morris?
Thank you. I'll go quickly. Obviously, huge kudos to the team. With the Adams arising as it did, and my complete lack of knowledge enough of that area and those constituents. That was really it was needed indeed. Couple of things. I actually thought I've got a couple of maybe longer picture things I was hoping that we could be looking at. One of which is the RCMP. Generally, we're seeing more of the folks showing up underneath our bridges and instead of homes. And so I think long-term, from a new idea perspective, I'd like us to think about the future relationships with RCMP rural. And the rural, it seems to me that the RCMP rural divisions are not getting enough support. And for an EA perspective, I think that is pretty critical. That was one of the ones that that's probably the main one. And ultimately, I know that Mike and I both want to hear more of your ideas around airport advocacy, because let's not forget that we're also trying to get connections for our community and our residents in smaller communities. So those are two key ones. EOC, I, like everybody, I was so amazed at how the communication has been, especially for somebody like me whose lack of knowledge, particularly on the Adams, is deplorable from my perspective. It's all my fault in terms of not knowing. And they stepped up and have helped so much. So a longer term thing may be some level, and I think I've mentioned it, sort of almost this workshop-y thing about these situations where suddenly we find pockets of our constituents in dire straits. And that when and where, when it's appropriate, more of a workshop kind of thing about how do we go forward? Because my next step has to be to go to Adams Lake very soon. And I got some good advice from yourself and others, of course, around the table, but just a longer term, let's prepare for the next time we're up against this as well. Thanks for the opportunity to yak.
Thank you.
Director Houghton, you have a couple of issues, or did we cover them already?
Well, a lot of them have been covered. Okay, we talked about the expense thing, so in the mileage, and okay, put that one aside. Some of the other ones have been brought up, like the communication, I believe it was Director Onslow. You're going to see a letter come tomorrow from one of the constituents through what has happened in the fires is the lack of cell service on the whole of Highway 5A. And I'm going to need some help from somebody to try and get through. I've reached out to the various, every time we had one of these votes on, they want a letter of support, I've reached out to them and say, oh, I got your map, but you forgot about 5A. And all through the corridor to Merritt on the old highway. So that's another one. Getting through with government ministries and who to talk to. Now, during this, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, the Westfold water situation. It's happened in other areas of the province, Lumbee and Cowichan Valley. And the government of the day has basically been nowhere to be found, but they send out their, I call them the roto cops, the NRO boys with guns at their side, and call them a water bailiff if you want. But today they were out in my constituency with the RCMP. So obviously they're not getting the job done. And somebody said, well, we'll send out the cops with you. Now there's got to be somebody, and I did reach out. I got the chief of staff for Bowen Ma's office. Actually, I did it the old fashioned way, email, and then I phoned her and I said, you know, we need help here. I mean, avoiding the issue it's just going to make the bloodbath worse. So is getting through to some of the government ministries direct. I need I think all of us need help with that because it can't, something that can't wait for next week or next month or 2 months because nothing has happened in Westfold. So obviously, well, from what I just said, and we'll talk about more tomorrow, I need help getting through, or we need help. And I'm going to ask for a letter of support for that tomorrow. Water situations, I know we touched on it earlier. I've got one like the Del Oro situation. There's only 42 people, very expensive water system to either spend money on or upgrade or the quality of water. I got the roads paved for them somehow. I don't know how that happened, but they forgot about that. And now they're hitting me for, you know, how come I'm on a water advisory and you got these water bills going out every quarterly or whatever they do. And I know Jamie and I talked about it when we met in Mission Flats. Well, there is really a solution. You can buy those little boxes that they install in their house, and you know, there's only 42 of them. But I said, well, I know what they're going to say. Why can't we buy them for them? So, and we've got this Canada Building Fund. So it may be for 42 in my particular constituency, that would help them at least get quality drinking water. Maybe we can talk about using a fund over here to purchase these, install them, and then at least they got quality water. Might not have the quantity of water they want, but something like that I'm going to need help with. I think we all need help with. Other than that, you know, we talked highways, the whole, I get pounded about Highway 5A, and I've met with just the local people over that, but nothing really has happened too much. They say they've been out with their study group and all this. I know nothing in government happens fast anyhow, but just getting through with the different government ministries. And I know we have a chance at UBCM to go do that. So anyhow, without taking any more of your time, I think that's pretty well summed it up. Thank you. Other than that, 10 months have been great.
Director Harwood.
What can I say? I came in here feeling like a fish out of water. And then realized after a couple of months, with all the years I'd spent in the newspaper, I really did have an inside knowledge of what goes on here, which made it a lot easier for me, I think, for other people. I really believe in the TNRD. I think the staff is amazing, and I think all of you guys should be very proud of what you do here, because as having been in the newspaper industry, I know all of the things that can go wrong. And I think you guys have come through all of what did go wrong incredibly well. There's a great feeling of dignity here and expectations for good things for the people who live in the area and for the electoral directors and the municipalities. And I get that feeling back from the people that I deal with out there in the public. I really, honestly, I've had some people that get in your face. That's the way of the world. But in most instances, if you talk quietly to them, work through it and show them the options, they usually figure it out for themselves and realize that they just needed somebody to talk to. I do a lot of talking to people who are like, oh, you got to do something. And then when you talk quietly to them, they carry on through. And I'm finding that people who are phoning the staff are also saying, you know, I should have done that a long time ago because I got to talk to somebody. And so I really want to say thank you so much. For me, I've got some expectations. I got lots of questions, and I want to start spending some of the money I have a hold of. So I'm going to grab somebody and say, can I do this or can I not? Because I'm still not sure what I can spend, what I can support. And I would like to be able to move forward with some of those things. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All I can say is, wow, all my concerns have been dealt with to the discussion points, and we should be doing this every 6 months. It's perfect. In all the years I've been here, I'm a good listener, so I don't have to ask any questions. So I thank you, CIO and staff, for putting that together. Do it again.
Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. First off, I'd like to say I'm so impressed with the professionalism and the dynamic people that are the staff of the TNRD. You hear an awful lot when you're not involved, as I am now with you folks, about, oh, government's doing this and government's doing that, and why can't they get this sorted out and that sorted out? Entirely different picture working with you folks. and very dynamic group, very open-minded, ready to receive new ideas and new thoughts. Very impressed with your group. I'd also like to say to the senior directors, thank you for putting us up with us newbies and our lack of understanding of procedure and how to get things done. You've been very accommodating, Chair Roden, and I think we're getting the hang of it, but I think we still have a lot more learning to do. And to my fellow directors, I'm so amazed at the broad cross-section of ideas and thoughts and skills and background. When I first heard about 27 directors, I thought, boy, that's going to be a handful. There's a lot of great ideas around this table, and it's because we have 27 directors. So that's a new perspective. In my area, Area J, we have had a whirlwind of issues, whether it's Tobiano Resort Association, fire halls that we're trying to get going, meetings or a community hall up in the North Valley. We've been making great progress with, and I expect to continue to do that with the team. In our last meeting up in Lee's country, we talked about the slash piles that are around the communities contributing perhaps to the wildfire situation or the potential explosiveness of the wildfire situation near structural areas. And at the same time, we've talked about, we've got garbage pickup at Tobiano, Savinaw, and Cherry Creek. The city of Kamloops has now moved into composting. And we have a big facility out at Ashcroft, and it crossed my mind in preparing for this discussion. Is there a way that we might, out in the Ashcroft area, marry the concept of removal of slash piles and composting? We have garbage pickup right now. The city of Kamloops apparently is having great success with their composting program, even though it's only a few weeks old. Perhaps we should be looking at the TNRD as a leading light for the province in taking some of this slash pile material, taking it out to the Ashcroft area, maybe working it with composting, turning that into a potential business out in the Ashcroft Cache Creek area, while getting rid of our some of our problem areas around the our communities that we're now madly trying to structural protect in a fire. So it's just an idea, Jamie. I'm not asking for any kind of response, but if we can marry the concept of cleaning up some of the surrounding forests, Lac Lejeune was 2 to 4 kilometers away from the Rossmoor fire at the start. And for the summer, we've been worried about whether it's going to catch fire. So if we can clean up some of BC Wildfire Service lands or the Crown lands at the same time as we help ourselves with reducing the fire, as you did, Doug, on your property, and then marrying that possibly with the composting that we're hearing out in the Cache Creek area, the Indian band, the Bonaparte band that came to us to talk about composting. And we've got the garbage pickup capability up in Lee's area and in my area. Maybe that's something that we can kind of put together as a solution to help ourselves. Other than that, thank you so much. It's been a delight working with everybody the last 10 months.
I just have a couple of issues. One of the things that I was going to point out to the EA directors, that if you have a project that you want to have started, you have to, for the Community Improvement Fund, a capital expenditure, that has to be ready and into our 2024 budget. So I think that you need to have a look in your areas to see what you want to accomplish with your community fund, and make sure that you, I don't know exactly who you talk to, whether it would be Carla or as far as getting your projects online. I know some of the ones that we have in area M&N, we deal with Jamie because it deals with a park. So I'm just making aware that if you have community projects, and it doesn't matter how big it is, it might be $10,000 or it might be $200,000. They all have to go into the capital budget and get approved. And it makes life a lot easier for everybody. I just had one question, maybe through to Jamie. I know it's probably the wrong time to ask, but have you got any updates on where our TNRD signs are at and whether or not we are making any headway with getting locations and getting that started?
Yeah, I'll have to follow up with you on that. It has been started in terms of the application process for MOTI permits, but I don't have a further update on that. I'll have to get back to you.
We can send that out to the board because I've had a couple other folks ask me as well. So once we get that information, we can share that with we can share it with this electoral area and board directors.
Yeah. Is there any other? Yes, Director.
Just a quick one, just to add. I think the most common question I've been asked, people know that I've been involved in other things, and we're all different ages in this around this table. The most common question is, are you having fun, Dick? What do you think of your job? I said, well, I don't consider it a job. I said, I consider it a very honored to serve the public. And I got up in the Westwood Hall last Saturday and said that during this water war meeting that I went to. And I said, I sat up at the head table with the different government people from the BC United Party that happened to be putting this one on and invited me to attend. And they said, well, I'd like to introduce Mr. Doug Houghton. He's your area representative. And so I got up and said, I feel very honored to be elected by you to represent yourselves. And I do. I think when you're on the other side of the table, I've helped politicians win elections for years, but then all of a sudden you go through an election yourself, and Herb and I talked about this a little earlier, it puts a shoe on the other foot, and you're representing the people. And I just want to say in the last 10 months, I've had fun. And it's nice when somebody says to you, thank you. I've had that many times over, whether it be getting somebody's road plowed or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I'll work on it for you and do it. And they can't. You often wonder, well, did they forget about me or something? And all of a sudden you get a nice postcard like I got in here for the Knutsford community for today when I picked up my mail for thanks for helping out in all the fire situations in Knutsford, and you know, those kind of things. And really, don't consider this a job. I consider it an honor, and I'm very proud to be around this table with the people that I sit with and the staff that I work with. Thank you.
Chair Laird, if I could, this is more than I expected. This isn't a traditional meeting typically, and I thought it was very valuable. So thank you for everyone's feedback. I appreciate it. And I think as a few people have already said, maybe doing this a couple times a year just to kind of reconnect makes good sense. So if the group's fine with that, that's something we'll strive to do.
Yeah, I think we EA directors would appreciate a similar opportunity like we had today. It's not very often that we all get together and we have an opportunity to share with the other directors as well as staff what our concerns are for each area. It's so different than being a municipal representative, which I've done for a while. But TNRD board is the best board that I've worked with. They're approachable and they perform very well. I've told numerous people that out of all my experiences as an elected official, this is probably the best board and the best staff that I've worked with. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Yeah. Is there any other business? That's it? Yes. Check it out. How's it?
Frickin' frack dinner at 5, maybe?
With that, I will adjourn our area directors meeting. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
You had something else?